Okay, we are recording, I believe.
Awesome.
So, Tim Bryson, thank you for joining me today and talking with me all the way from University of Maryland.
Yep.
Really pleased to have you. And you are joining us as part of our EDI week, Quality, Diversity and Inclusion Week within the School of Sport and Exercise. And today, you and I are going to have a discussion around kind of some of the sort of challenges within EDI in sport and certainly the context in which you work, some of the comparisons across the UK and the US. And really, I'm hoping that this is, going to be a continued relationship and will lead to other things where we can get the students involved, perhaps, and grow our understanding of each other's places, destinations. And I think that will be really valuable. So yes, thank you for joining us. Really, really pleased to have you, and thank you for your time. I realise the time difference means you're up nice and early for me. So just to start, Tim, tell us what you do over there.
Yeah, most definitely. So thank you again for the invitation, but also the introduction, Samantha. So for those who know me, my name is Tim Bryson. For those who don't know me, it's still Tim Bryson. But I call myself a Black millennial educator. I say that because my Blackness, my Black joy, my millennial identity, and my belief that education can change the world guides my personal mission statement to help all people identify their passion, inspire vision, and walk in purpose. I get to currently do that work at the University of Maryland, College Park, located just a few miles outside of Washington, D.C., where I serve as the program director for student athlete career development. In my role, it's a lot of fun. I get to help our college athletes in Maryland find jobs, right? Find internships, pursue graduate and professional school, out both within the U.S. context, but also across the world. In addition to my full-time role in Maryland, I'm also a second-year PhD student in our College of Education, where my research interest focuses on the intersection of internationalization in college athletics with a unique focus on international college athletes. So I'm super excited to be here. I cannot wait to get into our discussion because of my initial research. I'm like, wow, like our worlds are very different yet so similar. Given that we share this love for sport.
Great, and as I said, we're very lucky to have you, so thank you. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about the current work that you do with athletes and how that might differ from working with perhaps international athletes?
Yeah, so this is my role is a brand new position. I'll hit 3 years in January. And what we've seen, particularly within the US context, is that over the last probably 10 to 15 years, there have been more roles located within athletic departments that focus on helping the college athlete transition out of higher education. And so before going into what I do day to day, I just want to first clarify that within the US, college students can pursue both their sport and school at the same time, which is a wild concept and one that's only in the United States in this way. So they spend between 20 and 40 hours a week, depending on the sport, on their sport, whether that's practice, nutrition, lifting, recovery, while also taking classes, which again is just interesting to think about. Understanding it's so germane to the U.S. culture. But what happens is because they spend so much time in their sport, right? They have to make sure they pass their classes, stay eligible to compete in their sport. They have very little time and or little time in comparison to non-athletes to pursue their careers, right? To do those internships, to connect with through informational interviews with graduate programs. And so we've seen more roles over the last 10 to 15 years, like myself, be created to help these athletes be introduced and really explore their career, right? To be able to walk in their purpose. So my job at Maryland, as I mentioned, I oversee our internship program, which is called the Internship Academy. So this is just finished its sixth year this past summer, but student athletes work up to 20 hours a week in the summer for 8 weeks, paid internship experience, which is important to note. But we place them in a career interest, a field of interest related to their desired career industry. So if you want to work in sport, we can place you in a sports setting. If you're interested in law, we can place you with a law firm. If you're interested in medicine, right, we can identify opportunities for research and/or observation hours within physiotherapy, sport therapy clinics. So it's an exciting time, right, that they get the work experience, but there's also learning that happens as well. So they complete reflection journals, they complete information interviews, they update their LinkedIn and their resume. So really a comprehensive experience to again help them identify and really explore their identity outside of athletics. In addition to that signature program, I get to also lead our Gossip Fellows program, which is a 2-year experience where college athletes meet once a month while also completing some asynchronous learning as well. But during their last semester, they present a capstone project to really help identify and inform us at Maryland in regards to how we can better create an experience for them as undergraduate students. This program is super unique in which once they graduate, they earn $1,500 to use towards whatever they want to help in their transition out of higher education. So again, a lot of connection to different professionals, different industries, but really a lot of learning that takes place in my role. And I'm honored to be able to help facilitate that going on 3 years come January.
Wow. Yeah, that's big.
Yeah.
One of the biggest differences, to students here who aren't necessarily competing at that level, they're faced with other challenges. They're trying to study alongside working and earning to pay their rent, those sorts of things, as well as having to get placement opportunities and bank up those hours and develop in lots of the same ways in terms of what's their purpose when they graduate, experience of that wider world. So some similarities, but obviously some really stark differences in terms of the challenges that they face. Both valid, competing things, putting love and effort and time into your sport as well as your education and developing yourself. And then throw in the other challenges as kind of trying to stay alive and feed yourself and pay your rent.
No, and I would add this too, right? Because I think there's a conception, at least a misconception, that all athletes in the U.S. are on full scholarship, and that's not true. There are certainly sports like football, men's and women's basketball, women's volleyball, to where every athlete that's on scholarship on that team pays nothing tuition-wise. But there are a lot of other sports to where students are still paying out-of-pocket tuition to go to school. And so that's another pressure that we have to think about and consider when supporting students, because it's like, to your point, you have athletes that are playing, soccer, but then traveling with the team, going to class, passing class, but then they may have a part-time job as well. And so one of the questions you asked me earlier that I forgot to mention, at least discuss, was that the experience of U.S. athletes is one thing, but international non-U.S. athletes that come to the U.S. to compete is a whole different experience. And so I chose to pursue international athlete career readiness as my research interest and topic for my dissertation, because the laws, the immigration policies that they have to adhere by, both while an undergraduate student, but also as they transition and want to work in the U.S., limit and guide their experience and their livelihood while here. But many athletes, there's 20,000 international athletes competing in the U.S. right now at the college level. But many of those athletes, a lot, but many of those athletes choose to go back home, right? Return back to their home country. And so how can I and how do we as U.S. educators best prepare and equip them to navigate their career development in a different country? And so that's what I'm uniquely interested in right now, because it's something that we don't talk about enough. But I think it's a huge opportunity for us to think about how we not only support them, but also how these students will then become ambassadors, influencers to help attract and recruit more international students to compete and or study in U.S. higher education.
Yeah. And some similarities there as well. We attract some international students, although in the School of Sport and Exercise, they're typically a lower population of international students than our home students. But again, how do we work with those differences and prepare them to go back home if that's where they want to go back home, or thrive and excel here if they're choosing to stay here or go somewhere else in the world. And I think certainly kind of global education or globalization of curriculum is something that we need to grow, because one of our students wants to come out and work in the States. There are challenges there, and how do we prepare them for that? And similarly, how do we support US students who want to come and experience the UK and perhaps find themselves a job over here?
This is good.
But it's great. It's fascinating to hear about some of the research direction. And as I said, I think we can continue these conversations because there are so many similarities and connecting components. So it's great. I love it. So what do you see as being the biggest challenge, if we bring it back to kind of equality, diversity and inclusion?
Yeah.
The biggest challenge, either in your context or within sport, what do you say it is?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this question a lot. And one of the biggest frustrations for me is that, sport historically has been used as a medium and or an example to where everyone can just come together and we forget all of our differences towards this common goal to win, right? To win a championship, whether it's national, world, global, etc. And I think that's fine, right? I mean, winning is why we play the sport for most people, right? To win trophies, of the awards, etc. But when we forget to acknowledge the diversity and individual differences within those group settings, it becomes problematic. And I say that because there are definitely times to which we can acknowledge, because we can do both, right? We can acknowledge the diversity within sports teams, sports organizations, accept, embrace it, leverage that to go win, and that's fine. But when you erase identity for another, for the purpose of winning, it becomes problematic in the sense that we aren't supporting individuals, right? And if we're not supporting individuals, then we're not supporting the team. So, in particular, thinking about equality, diversity, and inclusion, both in traditional sports settings like teams, but also different career industries like sport therapy, like medicine, like physical therapy. We have to do a better job, not just acknowledging the differences, but sitting with the discomfort that we experience after first acknowledging our own privilege. And I say that even as someone as a Black man, because not everyone I speak with looks like me, right? Identifies with the same social identities that I identify with. And so, how do I think about not just my privilege, but also how my identity shapes the interactions and the conversation that I have with, right, these patients, right, or with these athletes? And I think we see that particularly from an ED&I standpoint, not just with awareness, because I think we've done a lot of awareness over the last definitely 18 months, particularly within the U.S. After the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, but really with how we treat patients, how we treat athletes. And I say that as someone who studied athletic training as an undergraduate student, and there's a difference in an ankle sprain between a Black athlete and a white athlete. And I want to explain that a little bit further. There experiences that Black athletes and Black people have within the US context in particular is not just health related, right? It's not just physical health related. There's mental health components to it, there's financial health components to it, there's cultural health components to it. And if we aren't aware of ideas and topics like racial battle fatigue, right? Or we aren't aware of that, just stress in general and how that impacts Black people differently than it does non-Black people, then we're missing on how we can best treat and support the athlete, the patient, those in which we are in community with. And so I think as we talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion, we need to be mindful of not just how we identify those and where to support those that we are in community with, but also first check our own privilege, right? Do our own self work and acknowledge, like, what can I bring? What should I be limiting? How can I help to endorse, sponsor, and or leverage other identities in the room to ensure that that inclusion can happen? Because otherwise, we'll continue to prioritize winning, championships, trophies, and miss the work, the community, the family, the learning that can happen within those moments.
Yeah, bang on. And you raised something there that makes me think about practice, out there doing the thing, being an athletic trainer, being a sports therapist, being an athlete, but also coming back to kind of what goes on in the classroom, the curriculum, the teaching methods, the tools, and kind of what we're doing. And what you said there about an ankle sprain in a Black athlete being different to a white athlete, immediately my brain went to, well, why would that be? And I'm thinking about kind of how we would describe currently on the program kind of symptoms, signs of an ankle sprain, the bruising that you would see or wouldn't see, or the skin changing color and the differences there. I'm not even sure we kind of tap into some of that, because perhaps we've been so misted or blinded by, well, this, these are the signs and symptoms. We've not stepped outside of our own privilege or context and said, well, what would it look like for someone else? And that's exactly the sorts of conversations we should be having with our students. It's exactly this type of stuff that we should be talking about in kind of curriculum, the design, and that sort of thing. So you raised some fantastic points there. And I think for me, the whole kind of challenging your own self, checking your own privilege, and that level of discomfort that has to come with that. It has to, it has to. But we have to find comfort in the discomfort, I think, don't we? And be okay with having those challenging conversations or challenging thoughts if you're going through it on your own and yourself, in terms of thinking about some of those things, checking your own privilege first and foremost before talking to others about it, knowing that actually that's okay, that's part of the process. It's going to be uncomfortable because you have privilege, and these are these are the reasons why, where it stemmed from. And it's not about necessarily beating yourself up over kind of what was and what has been, in that sense of something you can't change, but what are you going to do about the future, and how are you going to go out there as a better practitioner, educator, athlete, support worker, whatever it might be, to make a difference and make a change. And I think that's key.
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, I think just driving that point home, as I think about like even treatment, it's not just about science. And I think we had to get away from just relying on science, particularly within treating athletes and patients, particularly within sport therapy settings. And I'll come back to that by first sharing an example from my own personal life. In undergrad, there's about a 2 or 3 year stint, like in a row, whatever, 1,000+ days, where I just had stomach issues, like just GI issues. And so my mom kept saying, you need to go to the doctor, go to the doctor. And I'm like, I'm eating the same things, right? There's nothing the doctor can tell me that would be eye-opening, right? to how to change my experience. And what happened was I left my undergraduate institution in the state of South Carolina, went to Ohio State, it's about 8 hours north, and my issues went away. My GI issues went away. And when I reflected back in that moment, I was like, it was never GI. It was stress. It was stress. And how it manifested was in my stomach. Going back to this example with the ankle sprain, a Black athlete recovering, you can't just put ice, and do the rice treatment and say, all right, this white athlete is better in 15 days, but you're not. Like, what's going on? There are other socio-political issues that are happening that impact how that athlete chooses to either invest in their treatment, right? Choose how their body responds to that treatment. But if we don't take the time to acknowledge like what is happening outside of the sport therapy room, right, the athletic training room, do we miss the mark and how we best can support and treat them? So yeah, I just want to drive that point home because it's something looking back, even 5-6 years later, it's like it was never about the food. It was about stress and peace of mind.
Yeah. Great example, and thank you for sharing that. We are very much now sort of on the sports therapy program trying to push and reinforce that the importance of the biopsychosocial approach.
Yes.
And how pain manifests itself and what that might mean, and not just focusing in on the physical, the mechanical stuff. So yeah, that's a great example for certainly the sports therapy students on that. So in the UK at the moment, we're talking a lot about, and it's not new, but it seems to be kind of newer for our institution in the last kind of year or two, is decolonising the curriculum. So one of my questions was sort of around, there's that body of work going on, but how do we sort of decolonize practice? But there might also be some, I don't know what's going on in the States at the moment, and whether that term is kind of thrown around quite a lot in the States as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm glad we're having a conversation because I should have prefaced this earlier by saying, and I know you agree, like neither one of us are experts, but we're here wanting to learn and get better and explore these questions in a way that may have never been explored in the same manner. And so as I think about decolonizing the curriculum, this has been, as you mentioned, y'all been talking about it in the UK for a few years. I think it's been more of a resurgence that's happening in the US over the last, again, 18 to 24 months as well. But going from curriculum to practice is a whole different ballgame. And so even going through my own homework and both through my former coursework, but also outside of coursework as well, I'm like, okay, this sounds good, right? Decolonize the curriculum, change up what we read, bring in different speakers, right? The land acknowledgments. Like, what does that actually look like, particularly in a world that's still, in an environment like higher education that's still neoliberal, right? And it still has capitalist views and practices that influence how I can even show up, how you and I can even show up in that space. And so part of it, I think, I immediately drawn to like decolonial thought, in that we talk about the curriculum a lot, but I don't think we as higher education practitioners, educators, those in positions of influence and power, encourage decolonial thought within those environments that need to be changed. Because to be honest, right, a lot of ideas and the change that we know can happen and can see happens with ideas, right? And it happens with community conversation and brainstorming. But if we aren't empowered to be able to think more critically about what this change can be, then how can it really manifest itself in practice? That's what I want to first start with. Two, the curriculum piece is fine, but I think depending on what analogy we want to pull from, right? Change happens by taking that first step. And I talk about that a lot with like walking in purpose. But to take that first step, similar to awareness to action, with identifying privilege, identifying our own identities, I think we need to first start individually and say, like, what can I do within my own sphere of influence, right? In community to influence and colonize what's happening around me. But I think this curriculum decolonization is such a broad yet theoretical idea that for many people, including myself, it's you have to first like digest it, right? Because you're unlearning. We talk a lot about learning in higher education, but you're having to unlearn so much that has happened in your life that you've been introduced to for so many years and or decades. So you have to first like digest it. All right, like what's going on? What are they saying? What am I talking about? To like figure out, okay, like where have I perpetuated colonialism in my own life, right? Within higher education and not check that, and then get to a place where you can begin to teach that with others. And I think it's a process that's ongoing, right? I think it's a daily choice and one we had to commit to, both in our personal and our careers within the higher education setting. But thinking about practice in particular, I think it first starts identifying like what can we do that's personal, that's individualized. What can we do that's practical, similar to what Feluke had mentioned in their talk. But then what can we do that's provable to help further accelerate the change that we know can happen, whether that's in the US context, UK context, really the global context, because it's not something that's going to happen overnight, right? As cliche as that sounds, it's not. But I do believe if we all commit to doing something each and every day within our own sphere, we can begin to see changes more tangible and more inspiring along the way. It's
Tough
huge.
question.
I mean, it's a tough question, but it's one that even now I'm continuing to just think about. It's like what? Because what does that really mean? And I think Feluke also mentioned, like, is this really possible? Right? Which is a question I think we can and should sit with and think about, like, if the world was established, if our world today was established from these values, these thoughts, these practices, how do we decolonize that without creating something totally different?
Yeah.
And I think
there's a lot of backpedaling to do, isn't there? There's a lot of, as you said, unlearning, and you've got to be open to that, haven't you? I mean, if you're in practice, I'm just thinking of our graduates are out there in practice now and are going to have to do some of that backpedaling and start to think differently. It needs investment in time. It needs your time. It needs your energy. It needs commitment to think, actually, yeah, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to do things differently.
I would say this, Samantha, to be honest with you, because I would say a lot of my, and I hate using the word success, but how I've gotten to where I am today is through these same practices, right? Having to assimilate into cultures I didn't agree with, having to navigate and acquire socio-political capital that I may not have agreed with as well. And so it's even thinking like, yo, like how I benefited from this, but now we need to decolonize it. But like, am I still going to benefit? Obviously, going back to the privilege piece, am I still going to benefit?
Yeah.
But if we want to take that risk and say, like, it's not even about the power or the capital, it's about legit doing what's right and doing what we know to be socially just. But I would say, as you mentioned earlier, working with college athletes in Maryland, is that in the US, we talk a lot about networking. A lot about networking, to which to me, I realize is really just identifying and leveraging sociopolitical capital. Working with international athletes, or at least non-US athletes, and helping them to find careers, navigate their systems back in their home country, I'm immediately drawn to an experience I had with one of my Australian athletes, one of the Australian athletes I get to work with, who was job searching back home in Australia. And I was asking one of the recruiters back in Australia, like, yo, like, what's the best way for them to really navigate and apply to these jobs, et cetera. And I said, is it networking? Is it this? And she looked at me and she said, networking is not valued in Australia like it is discussed and talked about in the US. And I said, tell me more. This is a new concept. What you mean? Like, you can network all you want, yada yada yada, but it's about what's on paper. Like, it's not the who you know, it's not who knows you, right? It's not this nepotism in the same way that nepotism is valued and rewarded in US context. And so for me, going back to this individualized and personal learning approach, it's like, okay, this is what's happening in the US, but like, this is not normal. Like, this shouldn't be happening the way it is. And so working with different students who are from different countries and continents is, okay, what does your context look like? How can I best support you in this way? But no matter the context, there's still the decolonizing practice that needs to happen, because we need to get back to where we first started, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, another great example. So
oh my gosh,
you've probably got loads.
Oh my god, yeah, it's been fun, but a lot of learning and unlearning, which has been exciting, but also revealing to myself that, like, the work doesn't stop. Like, I'm still tied down, should be held accountable and responsible for helping to reimagine a new future where we can all benefit and walk on our purpose together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're giving our students, our graduates, a really good sense for, you want to go out there and work in the world, you're going to need to, you know, come across these same things, these same challenges, these same differences, appreciate those, learn to work with them, support them. It's a lot, but hopefully it's worthwhile in the end, that we learn about those individuals and we understand the different cultures and contexts that they're coming from, the things that will influence them and motivate them in whatever environment that might be. Great, thanks for that, Tim.
No, of course.
So thinking specifically then about our sport and exercise students within the School of Sport and Exercise, how do we send them out there? What do we do to prepare them to be equity-minded professionals? You know, how do we get them to go out there and be as inclusive as they can be, as appreciative as the diversity that they will come across? How do we do that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's almost twofold. And I think we can first start in collaboration with those, or I guess threefold. But first start in collaboration with those that are on our campus, right? Those that are on your campus, whether it be different offices who are doing identity-based work or doing EDI, about what this work looks like within, at that particular cross section, at the intersection. And I say that both collaboration at the local level, but also the global level, can help to at least elicit some new ideas, because for many of us, right, for those especially who may not have traveled far and or out of their country to pursue education, it's a bubble, right? Whether we realize it or not, it's a bubble. And I'm so glad I was introduced to international ed, about a year ago, to help see like, yo, Tim, the world is bigger than what you think it is, right? So I think it's first is disrupting that bubble by bringing in people that have different opinions and perspectives, or just differing perspectives and opinions, but two, both locally, but also nationally and globally. The third thing that I'm thinking about in particular is about how these students want to make change and be the change they wish to see in the world. And I say that, again, another cliche, at least in the US context, but I say that because when I ask students about privilege, right, they may not be willing and or as open to talking about it, right? Or know what that means, to be honest. But if I ask them, like, yo, like, what's one issue that you just don't agree with? Or what's one global issue that you would change if you were the world leader tomorrow, whatever. There's almost an immediate, like, here's what I would do, right? Or this is the issue that I would solve. And then I said, okay, how? And I think when you begin to unravel social justice issues, global inequities, global inequalities that individuals have and or have thought about within themselves, I think that's when you can begin to introduce, like, yo, like, how does diversity show up in this conversation, or this change policy? How does equity show? How does inclusion? What does it mean to be socially just, right? And I think that's when we can begin to have those conversations rooted in EDI. But until we disrupt what has been normal and or what has been normalized within our value systems, within our mindsets, it becomes hard to be equity-minded professionals, especially given that we just perpetuate what we see, right? We talk about you can't be what you see, but we also perpetuate what we see. And unfortunately, what we've seen over the last hundreds of years has not been okay. It's not been inclusive. It's not been socially just. But I do believe that this is the time, both in the U.S. context, but also the UK context, to change that. We've had disruptions, right? We've had a lot of conversations. We continue to have a lot of awareness movements, but that's like the moment is now. We have the knowledge, we have the connections. We're even more globally connected now through technology. Like, why not do something now? Like, why wait?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're having the conversations. That's got to be the first step, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about it, and I think that is the first step, that we get comfortable with talking about it. And I love the idea of bursting the bubble. Certainly from the kind of teaching the students' perspective, bursting that bubble of safety in a classroom, and it looks like this, and this is how you do a particular joint assessment, and this will be the result. No, it doesn't happen like that when you go out in the big wide world. They try and do that when there are a load of other players running around you and you're trying to sort something out, or throw in all those other complications.
But you can even do it. I'm even thinking about like clinical placements, right? Like there are some people who are just going back to my own experience, like I want to work with football, or I want to work with rugby, or I want to work with this soccer team. It's like, whoa, that's cool, right? And you can do that. You can do that as well. But let's think about some other clinical placements that you have not considered and or have not mentioned. Let's talk about why. Is it the geographic location, right? Is it the athlete population? Is it the reputation for whatever that's worth and there has meant over the last decades or hundreds of years? Like, what is it about these other ones that you are not, gung ho about?
Yeah.
Let's have a conversation about that as well, because I mean, a lot of our learning, and I'm sure you can speak to this as well, happened in environments and or with teams that like we probably didn't expect. Speaking for myself, I'm like, whoa, I did not expect to learn this much in this class, or I did not expect to learn this much at this clinical site, but I'm so happy I did because it's made me better and it's made me more equity minded, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, I think a lot of students come back from placements where perhaps they've worked with disabled athletes, disabled young children, and the value that they've got out of that versus just going and working with the first team football soccer team. It's just transformational, isn't it? And unless you consider embarking on those placements and opening up yourself to those experiences, you'd miss out.
You do. And I'll mention this, Samantha, is that when we talk about diversity, equity, equality, right, and inclusion, I think immediately we as people are drawn to both gender and race. But as you mentioned with ability, there's so much diversity within diversity, as wild as that sounds. And so it's not just about race and gender. There's so much more out there for us to learn and or consider and be mindful of to create a more socially just for us all.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about sports therapy or athletic training then. I'm a sports therapist, as you know, by background. Yes. You've trained as an athletic trainer. What do you see as the differences in those two sectors, if you like, so UK versus US?
Yeah. So I'm curious to learn more about y'all's context as well, because I know it's different. And even we had a program last night with a school in Canada, McMaster University, and they have a physiotherapy program. So it's like 3 different contexts, 3 different degrees and whatnot. But in the US, speaking from my own personal experience, many of the students that I was in coursework with at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, they did athletic training because they knew that the foundational learning and knowledge that would come from that coursework would better prepare them to pursue medical school or physical therapy school or physician assistant school. And to be honest, even 5 years later now, I can probably count on one hand out of 35 of us that are still practicing as athletic trainers, which is kind of mind blowing. So I'm curious to learn more about like what are pathways for career pathways for students who are doing sport therapy in the UK, but even to the preparation, because I think a lot of what we've seen, going back to the equity minded professional piece, and one thing that I struggled with in undergrad was like you spend so many hours in this environment or like with this team that my identity, my worth, my value is like tied to my curriculum or it's tied to my identity as a student. And like what are opportunities for me to explore my identity outside of that? And so that's one of the reasons as to why I actually chose to pivot a little bit and still take the skills that I learned from athletic training, sport therapy to a different industry. Because as a Black man in athletic training in the US, I didn't see myself, didn't feel like I was valued, especially working with many athletes who look like me on the football and basketball teams. But I would love to hear more about y'all's context as well to then further tease out like what are some of the unique differences between the two contexts.
Yeah, and I guess my appreciation of the differences comes from what I've been told, but also having the wonderful Dr. Craig Pfeiffer with us. He's an athletic trainer delivering on our sports therapy program. He's been able to really kind of highlight some of those the differences. From my perspective, two distinct careers within the UK that most often get compared to sports therapy and physiotherapy, and on open days, and campus visits, and people say, well, what's the difference? I sort of throw it out to, what do you want to be at the end, or what do you want to do at the end with it? Do you want to work in our National Health Service and work with cardiorespiratory patients or patients that have had strokes, other neuro-based conditions? Then you would do physiotherapy because they get a snippet of musculoskeletal, neuro, respiratory, yada, yada, yada. So if you wanted to be a physiotherapist working in one of those settings in our National Health Service, which I know is probably one of the biggest differences, isn't it? Then physiotherapy would be for them. If you are all about the musculoskeletal, want to work in sport or with exercising populations, want to set up your own business, but it's all really about kind of musculoskeletal therapy, then sports therapy is for you.
Wow.
So we don't touch on respiratory or rehab from stroke, the neuro side from that perspective, but we'll look, So it's very much musculoskeletal focus, peripheries and spine, and that's us. So it's 3 years spent really focused in on that side of things.
So let me ask you this: is the physiotherapy program a master's program?
It can be both. You can do a 3-year undergraduate, just as you would a 3-year sports therapy, or you can do it as an MSc. Typically, the MSc is a couple of years for physiotherapy.
So that's another difference then, because at sport therapy, so athletic training in the U.S., I know Dr. Craig's probably told you, has moved to a master's entry level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did mention that. The other difference that I think exists between athletic training and sports therapy is the amount of kind of trauma, pitch side care stuff that you guys do. I think you there's a lot of that, and we don't do very much of that. So they'll have kind of basic pitch side and trauma care, basic strapping and taping, but I think you guys do a hell of a lot more of that than perhaps we do.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. And I would say that makes more sense then, because our physiotherapy equivalent is PT school, but PT school is a doctorate degree in the US.
Right, okay.
Which is 3 more years on top of your 4 years of undergraduate.
So would an athletic trainer go and set up their own business and work one-on-one with patients outside of a sporting context, a bit like sports therapy?
That's a great question, Samantha. So there's been a lot more athletic trainers and physical therapists who are beginning to do that over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly from this whole work-life balance situation.
Mm.
And they're finding more. I mean, they're getting a lot of clients, especially they're taking the clients from the clinics, and or people who go do fitness, recreationally, setting up shop and just catching them on their way out or catching them on their way in. And so there's been a lot more entrepreneurial spirit, which I mentioned earlier. I think, the change is now, the time is now to see a different reality, because millennials, younger millennials, Gen Z are like, whoa. I'm not going to be a sport therapist for 30 years on one team. Like, I can do this for a few years, right? Get my clout and then go start my own business and do the same thing I want to do, have a lot of fun, make a lot of money. And so that's been interesting too, because there's been I have a couple of friends who started their own business who have the cupping, right? Have the stem machines, who are doing grafting and needling in their own way, like, which has been pretty dope to watch.
Yeah, it's nice to have the option, I think, and what we're trying to do is make sure that the curriculum sets them up for go out there and be an entrepreneur, be a business person who can be successful, or go and be someone who can be employed as a first team therapist working alongside a good level club or team, and do it that way if you want to. But you, like you say, have the flexibility to do a little bit of work in basketball, maybe have some clinic on the side.
Yeah.
I mean, I spent my initial years post graduation driving around with a couch, playing the massage clip in the back of my car, doing home visits and making my money that way. And, I was setting up clinics in people's living rooms and doing it that way.
Hold on. So this is good. So y'all, in your program, y'all help teach like entrepreneurial aspect of sport therapy?
Yes. I mean, at the moment, it's kind of separate from curriculum. It's kind of, extracurricular or enhancement activities. So we'll put on sessions about developing your own business, doing your taxes, those sorts of things that would help you be a business person. But I think as we see things move forward, that will be much more of kind of what's in curriculum across lots of programs, not just sports therapy, but, coaching, S&C, sport and exercise science.
Wow. Yeah, that's another difference. That's not happening here. Nah, it's on your own. Or some people go athletic training, undergrad or master's now, and then go get an MBA.
Mm.
So it's like, yeah, that's dope.
Something you said earlier about networking being like the big thing. Do you teach them how to network in curriculum?
In my curriculum, yes.
Mm. But in kind of broader, like, so did you have that education?
So
within your athletic training?
Not in the same way.
Mm.
So one of the biggest, so when I was an undergrad as an athletic training student, I knew probably halfway during my experience that I was not going to be practicing as an athletic trainer or a sport therapist. Yet I still did the degree because I transferred schools to this program, but two, I wanted to be certified, to which I was after I graduated. But I also knew that at some point I was going to be working in sports. I don't know what capacity. And so I stayed with it because there's very few athletic trainers. I'm curious to learn about y'all as well. Very few athletic trainers or sport therapists that then pivot and have careers in sport, but that's not in sport medicine. And so in undergrad, I started pursuing different career outside of athletic training. And I got involved with an internship program. And in that program, they say, here's how you network. Here's how you send a message on LinkedIn. Here's how you conduct an informational interview. And I'm like, whoa. I had to do a whole different career search than what my peers are doing in class. And so I've taken that and implemented it with Maryland athletes because, again, in a similar way, because networking is so valued and preached in the U.S., athletes in particular within the U.S. higher education system, they have a lot of clout. They have a lot of name, image, and likeness pool with employers and with grad programs because they're so visible. But what they don't realize is that they're so visible, yet it's so normal to them to just do what they do that they have not considered in similar ways how to leverage their name, their image or likeness, not just for endorsements and brand deals, but also for career development as well. And so I think that's something we're teaching now.
Just thinking that, I mean, that's great preparation if the sport doesn't work out, right? If they get an injury that means they can't compete anymore, what are they left with? They're left with all that other stuff,
Correct.
So that's
correct.
A great setup. Yeah, good. Okay, so if you were to sort of leave our community with one thing, what would it be that you would share with us?
Yeah, so the one thing I would say, particularly as it relates to equality, diversity, and inclusion, is to really think more critically and spend isolated time thinking about what your role is in all of this. I think, again, whether it's decolonizing the curriculum, whether it's diversity, equity, equality, inclusion, social justice, right? Whether it's broad yet theoretical topics that for many people either have to opt into because of our identity, right? And or choose not to, it's all here. But until we take hold of that and take ownership of that and what our role is in helping to change, and again, I keep saying reimagining a different future, we'll continue to have these awareness campaigns, we'll continue to have these conversations and not move towards conversation with action. And so I would leave us with, including myself, what can I do? What can I learn? What can I unlearn about myself to continue advancing equality, diversity, and inclusion efforts, not just at my institution, but across the world? Because we need you, right? I need you, Samantha. You need myself. We need each other to really help progress and advance this movement because it's needed and it's long overdue.
Yeah, 100%. And by the end of this week, if everyone who's listened to this talk and the other talks that are going on, if they can finish the week with that in their mind, what is it that you can do? How are you going to make a change? How are you going to put your stamp on things? Even if it's the smallest of things or seemingly the smallest of actions, but a step in the right direction. What is it that you're going to commit to today?
You got to take that step, Samantha. As I said, identify passion, inspire vision, walk in purpose, but we can't walk until we take that first step.
Indeed.
You got to take that first step.
Tim, thank you. It's been a great discussion. We've definitely thrown up some things there that I think we could talk for hours about.
We're gonna do this again soon. Don't you worry. Yeah. Don't you worry.
Yeah, it will be good to talk again. And like I said, let's get some of our students together.
Yeah.
Let's get them together. Let's get them talking. But yeah, I just want to say thank you again for joining us. Thank you for giving us your your vast experience and insight, and we really value your contribution to this week. So
no, I appreciate it. Anyone that wants to reach out to have further conversation, Samantha has my information. Be happy to connect with y'all as well.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Okay, take care.
Peace out.